everybody. Well, I'm very excited to introduce to you the latest pedal from Source Audio. This is the EQ2 Programmable Equalizer. Yep, we've updated our old programmable EQ and made some huge improvements. The EQ2 is a 10-band stereo equalizer with a very easy to navigate graphic EQ control set. But hidden just below the surface, there are always hidden powers within all the 1 series pedals. Just below the surface, you can quickly access the pedal's parametric equalizer controls. The parametric controls allow you to move any of the 10 bands back or forth over the frequency spectrum. You can also adjust the Q factor and make those bands skinnier or wider. It's also got 4 easy to access user presets, or in preset extension mode, you can add 4 more presets for a total of 8. It's also got 5-pin MIDI DIN input and through ports that allow you to access up to 128 user presets, as well as make a number of on-the-fly changes with an external MIDI controller. It's got stereo inputs and outputs, which means that if you want, you can create an entirely different set of EQ scenarios for each of the stereo outputs. And last but not least, hidden just beyond your 4th user preset, there is a tuner. We are pretty excited about the tuner. We think it'll be nice to free up some space on all of those overcrowded pedal boards so that you can add more effects pedals. Okay, let's get into this. The first thing I want to do when programming a preset for the EQ2 is select a preset position. I can scroll through presets either by pressing the select button, or I can hold down the foot switch. That will start it scrolling through the presets. When you get to the preset you want, just release. I'm going to work in preset number 1. Now, to select which frequency band you're going to edit, simply push down the center encoder knob and turn until you get to the frequency you want to change. Then release. The LED here at the bottom indicates which band is currently selected. So now we turn the knob without pressing it down and we can boost or cut that band. So let me keep working with this until I get a sound that I like. Okay, here it is bypassed. And engaged. All right, now I've got my EQ settings. I can use this little blue output knob to either boost or cut the overall signal. It will give you up to 12 dB of additional boost, which is nice. Now to save this preset, I just need to press and hold the save button. When the LEDs stop flashing, the preset is saved. You'll see if I scroll through all the presets, my settings are still stored when I get back to user preset number 1. So that is how you make standard graphic EQ adjustments. It's really simple and it will get you through much of what you probably want to do with this pedal. But there is much, much more. So let's dive in into some of the slightly hidden, more advanced features of the EQ2. Starting, of course, with the parametric capabilities. So let's get into it. In addition to boosting or cutting a frequency, the EQ2 also allows you to move any of its 10 frequency bands up or down the frequency spectrum. There is also a Q factor control. A lot of people just call this a Q control. That allows you to make the width of any adjustable band either wider or skinnier. So to get to these 2 controls, I first need to select the band I want to edit. Then I press and hold the center encoder without turning it. After a couple of seconds, the edit menu will open. You'll see the screen reads FREQ, which stands for frequency. So if I turn the knob, you'll see I have a bunch of different choices in here. But I want to adjust the frequency. So let's scroll back to Freak and press the knob. You see, because I selected the 250 Hertz band, it says 250 on the screen. I can now move that frequency up or down the spectrum by just turning the knob. When I'm done, I just hit the knob again to freeze the value and exit the edit menu. Of course, you can also make changes like this with the Neuro editors, which do have a significantly more detailed display. And I will get into that in a bit. But it's still nice to be able to access these parameters with just the pedal by itself. I can also adjust the Q of this band. Again, I'll press and hold the encoder to enter the edit menu, then release and turn the knob to scroll down to Q fact. Press the knob again. Okay, so now you can see the screen reads 1.0. That means that the Q spans a single octave. If you want to make the frequency skinnier, so that it only covers a very small section of the frequency spectrum, I turn the knob up. If I want to fatten the adjustable area around the frequency center point, I turn it to the left and make the Q wider than a single octave. So now I can just follow that procedure and make the rest of my parametric edits. And when I'm done, I can save the presets the same way I described before. Press and hold the save button. Okay, so now let's talk about the stereo features in this pedal. Within each preset, there are actually two discrete equalization sets. By default, when I make edits, I'm adjusting both EQ engines simultaneously. So the same EQ settings go to both the stereo outs. But if I put the pedal into split mode, I can set up a different EQ curve for each stereo output. Split mode is found in the edit menu as well, so let's go there and scroll down to split. Hit the knob, then select on. I'll hit the knob again and exit the edit menu. Now if I move the frequency selector all the way to the right, just beyond 16 kilohertz, resides the channel 2 settings. You'll see that because the EQ engines were locked together before, I still have the same settings in channel 2 that I had in channel 1. So I can either use these settings as my starting point, or I can do a quick double click of the center knob, and it will automatically flatten all my channel 2 settings. Okay, let's set up an example preset in here. There it is. Now let's move the selector all the way to the left and get back to my channel 1 settings. And there they are. Okay, I also want to boost the output of just channel 2. So let me show you how to do that. I'll go back to channel 2, go into the edit menu and scroll to gain. From here, I can boost the output level of just channel 2. So let's go up 3 dBs. So this level is actually in relation to the master output knob. And that means that if I turn up the blue master output knob, it will automatically boost the output for both channels. But channel 2 remains still 3 dB louder than channel 1. So as it is, I can use this setup in a stereo rig, but there is another very cool application for this. If you're running a mono rig, you can use an external switch to toggle between the two channels. Basically, you're just swapping the settings around in the stereo outputs. But if your signal is only going out of output 1, then you're essentially changing the EQ settings with a single press. Obviously, this is a great way to quickly switch back and forth between a rhythm and a lead sound. The cool thing is you can program 2 different EQ settings for every one of the presets, and that essentially doubles your number of presets. So I've got my external tap switch here, which I'm going to connect to the control input on top of the pedal. I'll need to select the external controller in the edit menu. I can choose between a few different options. So I'll go into the edit menu and scroll all the way down to control option, CTRL option. Click the knob to get in there, and I've got 4 options to choose from. Number 1 is for an expression pedal. Just so you know, if you want to set up expression control, you will need to go into the Neuro desktop or mobile editors to do it. I'll touch on that in a bit. Number 2 is for an assignable external switch. Number 3 is for scrolling up through the presets. And number 4 is for engaging and disengaging the tuner. I want to select option 2. By default, the assignable foot switch is set up to swap channels. So as you can see, I can now change my EQ settings by simply hitting the external switch. All right, so now let's take a look at the EQ2's built-in tuner. You can set up tuner access a number of different ways, but the default method is simply to press and hold the foot switch. It doesn't matter if the pedal is bypassed or engaged, but the EQ2 will scroll through its presets, and when it gets just past preset number 4, you will see T on the screen. At that point, just release the foot switch and the tuner will engage. You just tune the way you normally would with most tuners. The left and the right arrows indicate whether the note is sharp or flat, and the center LED turns from red to green when the string is in tune. It will also mute your signal, which is nice. So to disengage the tuner, just hit the foot switch again. All right, I've talked about the edit menu quite a bit, but I haven't mentioned every option listed. Let's get to the stuff I haven't talked about yet. I'll go through them in order of appearance in the pedals menu, but at this point I'm actually going to switch over to the Neuro desktop because it just provides some nice visuals that will help you better understand what's going on with each parameter. So first up is the frequency again. So in addition to being able to boost frequency bands like so, I can also, like I said before, move them up and down the frequency spectrum. And I can do that by simply grabbing it in the graphic itself with the cursor and moving it back and forth. If I want to be more sort of specific, I can also type it in down in this field. So that's the basis of a parametric EQ. There is also the Q factor. You'll see that I can just click on the Q field down here and drag my cursor up or down to make this frequency band skinnier and really focus in on very specific frequencies, or I can make it wider and affect a much larger area. Next up is split and gain. You'll see if I hit the split button over here, then select channel 2, I can start making edits to channel 2 alone. Channel 2 is represented by the blue line. Over here in the gain control, if I click the Show in Graph button, then boost the signal, you'll see the entire channel 2 EQ curve gets uniformly boosted. And if I go back to channel 1, I can do the same thing with that curve. Next, we have the limiter. If you have an especially strong signal going into the EQ, you can turn the limiter on and eliminate any unwanted clipping. The limiter also has a look-ahead delay that you can turn on or off. Next to that is the noise gate. We've got a built-in noise gate that you can engage for any of your presets, and that's always nice if you have an exceptionally noisy signal. And of course, working in conjunction with the noise gate is the threshold control. And you can use that to set the point where the noise gate closes. Okay, HP frequency. So we've got a high pass filter in there that you can use to eliminate those super low frequencies, which in the case of a bass guitar can really tighten up your sound by getting rid of those inaudibly low frequencies. Those super low frequencies can't really be heard, but can give you kind of a floppy sound by adding a bunch of unnecessary stress to your speakers. Next, there are the shelving filters. So for the highest and lowest frequency bands, you can select between a shelving or a peak filter. The shelving filter boosts or cuts all the frequencies above the highest band or below the lowest band, as opposed to a peak filter that only affects the areas around the center point. Here, let me mess with these a little bit, and you can see by the shapes exactly what's happening here. All right, the configure option lets you select between a parallel graphic EQ or a parametric EQ in series. Now let's move over to the hardware options, where you can select between a bunch of global settings. Now global means that the setting applies to all the presets on the pedal. First, you can use this dropdown to assign the pedal to any MIDI channel between 1 and 16. There are a bunch of different foot switch options. These allow you to choose how you want the foot switch on the pedal to do things like engage and bypass the pedal, scroll through presets, or access the tuner. And as I talked about before, the final option in the edit menu is the control input function. This lets you control what's happening with an external foot switch or expression pedal connected to the control input on the top of the pedal. All right, to wrap this up, I'll just point out a couple of other options that can only be edited in the Neuro editors, not the pedal by itself. First, if you've connected an external switch to be assignable, this drop-down menu lets you decide what it will do. By default, it's going to swap the channels, but it can also select the input or output, as well as change parameters within a preset with the Use for External Control option. Right next to that, in the I/O routing section, you can use the drop-down to select your signal routing. There are a bunch of different options in here. You can choose auto detect, mono in, stereo out, stereo in, stereo out. There's a few different choices in here. You can also set up an external loop. I imagine some guitarists might want to put a drive pedal in the EQ2's loop and use the swap engine functions to quickly change whether you have EQ settings before or after the drive. You might also want to have EQing before and after the drive. So that's a cool feature. And finally, there are your expression pedal assignments down here at the bottom. If you've got an expression pedal hooked up or an external tap switch assigned to Use for External Control, you can use these fields to select the high and low points of the assigned parameters. So first I need to turn on external control. Then I select my control source, whether it's an expression pedal connected directly to the control input or a remote controller that's coming through a Neuro hub or an external MIDI controller. Next, I select which parameter will be controlled. You can see I can choose from pretty much any parameter. There's a master volume output level. I can boost or cut any of the frequency bands on either of the channels. I can make parametric movements by sweeping a filter across the frequency spectrum. I can also assign expression to the cue. And over here, I set my minimum and maximum points. Minimum being the expression pedal's heel down position and maximum being the toe down. And you can see I've got 4 different rows of matching fields, which means I can simultaneously assign 4 different parameters and move them with my expression pedal or external switch. So that is a lot of power. And let me show you just a couple of examples of expression control that I've already set up. This one boosts the output as well as boosting the 2 and 4K bands. It also sweeps a shelf filter across the lower frequencies and boosts them. And here's what that sounds like. And let's try one more. I've got this one set up to replicate a crybaby wah. I mean, that's just one of the cool things you can do when you've got expression control of parametric equalization. Here it is. Okay, that's it for now. Please feel free to leave additional questions in the comments section. You can find out more about the EQ2 and other Source Audio pedals at our website, sourceaudio.net. So, thanks for watching. Goodbye.